I generated horror stories. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Ravenwood. The wind howled and the rain pounded against the windows of the old Victorian mansion on the hill. Inside, a group of friends huddled together round the fireplace, trying to stay warm and dry. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Doors creaked open on their own, shadows moved across the walls, and a chill ran down their spines. One by one, the friends disappeared, leaving only the sound of their screams echoing through the halls. The remaining few frantically searched for a way out. But the doors and windows were all locked tight. They soon realized that they were not alone in the mansion. An evil presence had taken hold, and it was hungry for their souls. As the night dragged on, they fought for survival, their fear and terror growing with each passing moment. But in the end, they were no match for the darkness that consumed them. In the morning, the townspeople found the mansion empty. The bodies of the friends nowhere to be found to this day. This old Victorian mansion remains empty and abandoned, a reminder of the horrors that took place on that fateful night in Ravenwood. It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Oakville. The wind was howling and the rain was pouring down in sheets. Sarah, a young woman, was driving home from work when she noticed a figure walking along the side of the road. She slowed down and rolled down her window to offer the person a ride. The figure was a man, dressed in ragged clothes and soaked to the bone. He climbed into the passenger seat and Sarah started driving again. The man didn't say a word, just sat there staring straight ahead. As they approached Sarah's house, the man suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled out a knife. He demanded that she drive to a secluded area outside of town. Terrified, Sarah complied and drove to a deserted field. Once they arrived, the man forced Sarah out of the car and tied her up with rope. He then proceeded to torture her with the knife, cutting her flesh and leaving her to bleed out in the rain. Days later, Sarah's body was found by a group of hikers who had stumbled upon the field. The police investigated, but the killer was never caught. Years went by, and people began to forget about Sarah's tragic death. However, on stormy nights, some residents claimed to see a ghostly figure walking along the side of the road, the same figure that Sarah had offered a ride to. Some even claimed to hear her screams echoing through the rain. To this day, they say that Sarah's ghost haunts the town of Oakville, seeking revenge on her killer and warning others not to trust strangers on dark and stormy nights. Once upon a time, there was a small village nestled in the woods. The villagers were simple folk who lived off the land and kept to themselves. However, there was a rumor that had been passed down for generations about a creature that lived deep in the forest. It was said that it was a monster with razor-sharp claws, glowing eyes, and a thirst for human blood. The villagers were terrified of this creature, and they never dared to venture into the forest after dark. One day, a group of young men decided to go on a hunting trip in the forest. They were confident and brave, and they didn't believe in the legend of the creature. They set out early in the morning and spent the day hunting and exploring the woods. As the sun began to set, they decided to make their way back to the village. As they walked through the forest, they heard a rustling in the bushes. Suddenly, the creature appeared before them. It was even more terrifying than they had imagined. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its claws were as long as knives. The young men tried to run, but the creature was too fast. One by one, it attacked them, tearing them apart with its claws. The next morning, the villagers found the bodies of the young men scattered throughout the woods. They were horrified by the sight, and they knew that the legend of the creature was true. From that day on, the villagers never ventured into the forest after dark, and they warned their children to stay away from the woods. The creature still roamed the forest, waiting for its next victim to come along. It was a dark and stormy night, and the wind was howling outside. The old mansion on the hill had been abandoned for years, but tonight there were strange noises coming from inside. A group of teenagers had been dared to spend the night in the mansion, and they were regretting it already. As they crept through the creaky old rooms, they heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of them. It was a ghostly woman, with long, tangled hair and a pale, gaunt face. She pointed a bony finger at them and let out a blood-curdling scream. The teenagers were frozen with fear, unable to move as the ghostly figure came closer and closer. They could feel her icy breath on their faces, and they knew they were in grave danger. Just when they thought it was all over, the ghostly figure disappeared into thin air. The teenagers stumbled out of the mansion, grateful to be alive, and never spoke of the terrifying experience again. But as they walked down the hill, they couldn't help but feel like they were being followed, and when they turned around, they saw the ghostly figure standing at the window, watching them with a menacing smile on her face. There was a small village, located at the bottom of a mountain range. The villagers were known for their superstitions and beliefs in the supernatural. One winter, a group of travelers arrived in the village seeking shelter from the harsh weather. The villagers welcomed them and offered them a place to stay for the night. As the night wore on, the travelers heard strange noises coming from outside the house. They ignored it at first, thinking it was just the wind. But the noises grew louder and more persistent, and soon they could hear scratching and clawing at the door. The villagers told the travelers that it was just the mountain spirits trying to scare them and that they should ignore it. But the travelers were not convinced. They barricaded the door and windows and waited for the morning. As the sun rose, the travelers ventured outside to investigate. They found that the snow was stained with blood and that there were strange footprints leading away from the house. The villagers were nowhere to be found. The travelers realized that they had been warned about the mountain spirits for a reason. They quickly left the village, never to return again. The villagers were never seen or heard from again, and the travelers' story became a cautionary tale for those who dared to venture into the mountains. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Emily who was walking home alone from a late night shift at work. She had a feeling that someone was following her, but she tried to shake off the feeling and quickened her pace. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. Getting closer and closer, she turned around, but there was no one there. She continued walking, feeling more and more uneasy with each step. Suddenly, she heard a voice whisper her name. She turned around again, but still nobody was there. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she realized that she was being followed by some unknown person. Emily started to run, but as she did, she felt a hand grab her shoulder. She turned around in terror and saw a tall, dark figure looming over her. Paralyzed with fear, Emily couldn't move or scream. The figure spoke to her in a low, menacing voice, telling her that he had been watching her for weeks and that he knew everything about her. Emily tried to break free and run, but the figure grabbed her and pulled her close, whispering in her ear. She could smell the stench of alcohol on his breath and feel his hot breath on her neck. Finally, Emily managed to break free and ran as fast as she could. Not stopping until she reached her home, she locked the doors behind her and called the police. But the person who had been following her was never caught. From that day on, Emily never walked alone at night again. She always made sure she had someone with her, and she never forgot the feeling of being followed in the darkness. Once upon a time, in a small town, there was a legend of a dark figure that roamed the streets at night. The figure was said to be tall and thin, with long arms and fingers that ended in sharp claws. Its face was never seen, always shrouded in darkness. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned house on the edge of town. As they made their way through the dusty rooms, they heard strange noises and felt a presence watching them. Suddenly, they saw a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. It was the dark figure, looming over them with its piercing red eyes. The teenagers tried to run, but the figure was faster, chasing them through the halls with its claws outstretched. One by one, the teenagers were caught by the figure, never to be seen again. The townspeople tried to ignore the disappearances, believing that the teenagers had run away from home. But they knew deep down that something much darker was at play. Years went by, and the legend of the dark figure became a cautionary tale for children who dared to stay out after dark. But one day, A new family moved into the abandoned house and started renovations. As the workers tore down walls and removed old furniture, they discovered a hidden room at the back of the house. Inside, they found the remains of the missing teenagers, their bodies torn apart and scattered across the room. But the most terrifying discovery was a portrait of the dark figure hanging on the wall. The townspeople knew then that the legend was true, and that the dark figure still roamed the streets at night, waiting for its next victim. Once upon a time, there was a small town that was known for its annual circus parade. The parade was a big event, and people from all over the region came to see the clowns, acrobats, and animals. But one year, something strange happened. As the parade marched through the town, the spectators noticed that the clowns looked different. Their makeup was more sinister, and their costumes were darker. The children in the crowd started to cry and hide behind their parents. Suddenly, the clowns started to behave strangely. They started to chase the children and adults, brandishing knives and other weapons. The crowd panicked and scattered, trying to escape the clowns' wrath. The town was thrown into chaos. As the clowns continued their rampage, the police were called, but they were unable to stop the clowns. The town was left in ruins, and many people were injured or killed. After the incident, the circus was banned from the town, and the clowns were never seen again. But to this day, people whisper about the sinister clowns and wonder what really happened that fateful day. It was a dark, stormy night when Sarah heard a loud shattering noise coming from her living room. Frightened, she crawled out of bed, listened carefully, and realized there was an intruder in her home. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she struggled to take a deep breath. With trembling hands, Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But due to the thunderstorm, the phone signal was cutting in and out, and she couldn't make the call. She knew that she needed to act fast, or else the intruder might find her. Sarah then ducked behind her bed, picked up the decorative pillow, which was heavy, and quietly made her way towards the living room, slowly and carefully. She waited until the unfamiliar person entered the room. In just seconds, the intruder was face to face with Sarah. Without a moment's hesitation, Sarah hit the intruder with the pillow repeatedly, causing them to stumble back out of the house and into the stormy night. She felt a bit victorious in at least pushing the intruder off her property and being able to protect herself in some fashion, but she knew she couldn't let her guard down just yet. She then ran around the house, securing all the doors and windows, and perched herself by the house front door, anxiously watching and waiting for the police to come and take her intruder away. When the cavalry finally arrived, she explained everything she knew and was extremely helpful to the police. The intruder was taken into custody, and Sarah was relieved to know she had been prepared and knew how to quickly adapt to a frightening situation. From that night forward, Sarah's home would be secured with a burglar alarm and a visible security camera. Once upon a time, there was a young girl named Leah who lived in a quiet suburb. One day, while walking home from school, she was kidnapped by an unknown assailant. Leah was terrified and didn't know what was going to happen to her. The kidnapper took her to a dingy basement and locked her up. She was all alone and didn't know what to do. However, Leah was determined to get out of this situation and tried to come up with an escape plan. Suddenly, she remembered that her mother had taught her a secret code in case of emergencies. Using the code, Leah sent a message to her mother's phone, which in turn alerted the police. The police quickly launched a search operation and managed to track down the kidnapper's location. They stormed the basement and rescued Leah. After weeks of therapy, Leah slowly started to heal from her traumatizing experience. She was grateful to all the people who had helped her and was impressed by the creativity and cleverness she had used to escape. In the end, Leah learned that she was stronger than she gave herself credit for, and that she could overcome anything with determination and help from those around her. I hope you enjoyed the AI-generated stories. Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for listening.